Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Bannon or Airspeed Prime here. I'm the site super moderator of Avatar The Last Airbender Online.com. I'm here today with a channel update basically and an announcement. Basically I haven't really been putting out videos that much of late, and the reason for that is basically because the podcast I mentioned a few Airspeed Discusses ago has finally kind of gone live on the site. We have launched the Avatar Online podcast, which is basically the podcast of the site Avatar The Last Airbender Online.com. I'm the main host of the podcast, and Callum Friars, or some of you may know him as Badgermole1 on YouTube. I've linked his channel a few times, and he's my co-host, and we'll be getting guests on from time to time. And basically the update is just that because of this podcast, I won't be doing really many Airspeed Discusses videos. I'll do them like the odd time when a new comic comes out or something like that, but for the most part the podcast will be taking the place of Airspeed Discusses, because that's pretty much what Airspeed Discusses was, the kind of placeholder for the podcast, because I couldn't get it started until now. It's better to discuss these topics with the kind of two people or more, as we're going to do on the podcast, than just me talking about it. And it should be more interesting for you guys as well. I'm going to continue to put out my episode commentaries and stuff like that. And also I'll be doing a kind of I'll be getting kind of certain discussion topics from the podcast, such kind of clips of the podcast, and putting it up on my channel as kind of a visually enhanced podcast thing. There'll only be certain discussions, like if we are discussing the characters, I'll put up a thing where you can have a look at the pictures of the characters as we're talking about them and stuff like that. If it's very picture heavy, I'll put up the discussion with those pictures going through the video. But as I said, the podcast has been launched on the site now. It's up for download straight from the site as an MP3. You can view it out from the site, just on the player there, audio player there, or the podcast is on iTunes. If you search Avatar Online in iTunes in podcasts, you should find us fairly easily. At the end of this video, I'm gonna put up the podcast kind of graphic that we're using on iTunes, and you should be able to easily find it by finding the podcast with that picture. Episode 1 is up right now. Episode 2 will be up in a day or two. Episode 1 is basically our introductory podcast. We talk about the core news that was out at the time. It was recorded on March 3rd, so it doesn't have all the latest news. That will be in the episode 2, which was recorded on March 18th, and that will have some of that. And also in episode 1 we have a discussion on The Promise Part 1, a big kind of review discussion topic on that, which is good. And that's pretty much episode 1. It's just under 2 hours. Episode 2 is just over 2 hours, and that's pretty much what the standard length of the podcast is going to be. It's probably going to average out at about 140 minutes, because once kind of news calms down, once core starts airing. That's the standard show format of episode 1 and 2 is basically introduction, all the latest news, a discussion topic, say like a book or just the Avatar topic, listener questions, and outro. But we'll also be doing a kind of another show kind of in the podcast feed, and that will be just kind of the Legend of Korra roundtable discussions, which will be basically just over an hour of myself, Callum, and maybe like a guest, talking about the latest episode of Korra to air. And I think it's a good idea for us to kind of put that as it's on its own, kind of just the discussion of the episode, because it is the big thing right now in the fandom that Korra is coming out. Having detailed discussions on the episodes and we'll be recording our discussion on episode 1 at the weekend, and episode 2, assuming it's episode 2 is coming out at the weekend, so we'll probably do that one next weekend. Just so there's a bit of a kind of gap between them, and we're not kind of left waiting weeks on weeks for the third episode to air on April 21st. So that's pretty much the podcast announcement. I kind of urge you all to listen to that, because as I said, it will be kind of taking the place of Airspeed Discusses, and pretty much my news videos. So yeah, subscribe on iTunes and stuff like that. Have a download. Give us feedback in the podcast forum. I'll link the podcast forum, the news post for episode 1, the iTunes feed in the description, and yeah, and that stuff pretty much. So that's pretty much all I have to say, I think. As I said, I'll continue to put out episode commentaries on my channel. They're probably a bit slower now, mainly because Core is coming out, and as I was expecting Core to air much later in the year, so I'd have much more of it done, but it hasn't turned out that way. But it's probably for the better. So thank you and bye.